if you help someone do something harder than they thought they could have, they're gonna, like, you've just increased their capacity, you've just increased their own self-image in a way that's so like such an empowering feeling and such a great feeling for the leader, to observe that in their team. Sometimes easier just to say, like, here, give it to me, let me do it. But if you resist that urge, I feel in the long run you're both better for it.
Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we sit down with executive leaders to explore what leadership really means through the lens of their stories, their wins, their struggles, their vision, and their lessons along the way. I'm Ty Hammond, founder of One Mountain Leadership and creator of the True Leadership Approach, an awareness-based path that helps leaders shift their focus from what to do about their problems to how to grow from them. Whether you're just stepping into leadership or are well-seasoned and at the top of your game, your potential won't be realized following someone else's script, but you can draw insights from their stories and turn it into wisdom by putting it into practice in your own life. Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast, where we explore the essence of leadership beyond tactics and performance by sitting down with executives to hear what matters most to them. I'm your host, Ty Hammond. Today's guest is Armen Rostamian. Armen is a visionary leader in analytics, data science, and AI, dedicated to turning enterprise data into measurable business growth. As Chief Innovation Officer at Smart Data Analytics AI and formerly VP of Marketing Intelligence at Beachbody, he has led initiatives to modernize data infrastructure, deploy advanced AI solutions, and apply experimentation methods like media mix modeling and multi-touch attribution. Armen has reduced customer acquisition costs, boosted engagement with personalization, and optimized digital experiences to drive revenue growth. His mission is to use data and AI to give organizations foresight, agility, and lasting impact. As a leader, Armen is a connector and is actively exploring what leadership means as changes in context occur throughout one's career. Armen, it's a pleasure for me to have you on the podcast today. Welcome to the True Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Ty. Appreciate the intro, and I try to live up to that preamble.
Fantastic. Well, I always start here. So every leader has a beginning. I found, of course, that who we are as people, as leaders at work and in life, starts taking shape long before we advance to an executive position of leadership. So I'm curious if you'd be willing to share who's someone from your early life or maybe an early experience that has shaped the kind of leader that you are today.
Yeah, and I think you start learning about leadership before you even know what the definition of it is. For me, it really started in my household with my father, and just really understanding the work ethic that he brought to his life and his career. We're an immigrant family, and so we started very with humble beginnings. My father was educated as an engineer, but coming into a new country required him to learn and really become who he is in his career while starting at 40 years old. Whereas, like, I'm 40 now, and I think of all the career that I've had. And so, the work ethic and just the passion of, like, sacrifice and doing all that really started with my dad. But he was a shy guy. He's an engineer. He was an individual contributor his whole career in that way. So I was always drawn to this more visible leader that you could think of. And in my early life, like when I came to Los Angeles, was in the late 80s, early 90s, and Magic Johnson and Pat Riley were the faces of sports in LA at that time. And you talk about two very charismatic and passionate leaders that led visibly, but always in a way that enhanced and raised the profile of the people around them. And so Magic was a passer. Pat Riley had the look and had the hair, but he was always putting his team in position to succeed. And so was Magic. So, when I think back as to how I kind of grew up in a social environment, I wanted to be that glue. I wanted to be that guy that got noticed. I'll be honest with you, like Magic was noticed on the court, but he was noticed by making the people around them more successful than they would be on their own. And so when I think back, like, into my leadership style, it's kind of the fusion of those two things. It's one, this like humble, like hard work ethic and not skipping steps, while this other side is about enabling the people around you and being a bit of a lightning rod for the team to kind of rally around. So when I think of my leadership style, it's kind of blending those two things with each other to find this yin and yang.
I really love that, and we share a couple of commonalities there. I'd say I definitely share the humble beginnings story and, deep inspiration from my father for work ethic. And then, yeah,
Yeah.
also just come from the same generation as you, so I remember when Johnson was coming on up and all those things, so, and what I really love about that is the realization that it doesn't have to be one thing or the other, and part of what I already hear in that is, that certain things help to form our foundation, and then who we are can be, this beautiful inclusion of all of these different things as we continue to learn and grow. That's amazing. Which kind of brings me to my next question. You said it at the beginning, before you even define leadership, we start taking in these influence. So I'm guessing, or I'm curious now, because this is the True Leadership podcast, right? Where we're exploring the essence of what that really is. Of course,
Yeah.
true leadership means different things to different people. What does true leadership mean to you?
Yeah, I think to me, true leadership really starts with responsibility. I think it's taking in and absorbing the challenges of the people around you and enabling them to really shine and be focused and confident. So, as a leader, typically the most difficult challenges arrive at your doorstep, and if your team and if your partners are able to solve things, then if you have the right people around, they're going to solve it on their own, and they're not going to be reliant on you. So the problems that make it to you are the hard ones and are the ones that have likely shaken the focus or confidence of the team around you. And so for me, true leadership is about that absorption of the responsibility and the anxiety and like the making someone feel like they could solve it on their own. Because like I started with the sports analogy, and I think the coach analogy is always something that I rely on. So the point is not for me as a leader to solve your problem. It's more to create the environment or the mindset in your mind to solve it on your own. And so I take the responsibility of giving them that confidence and saying, like, no, like this challenge is something that isn't too hard for you, or it isn't something that you can't figure out. Here's like how I could support you in that solution. I'm not going to replace you or fix it for you, because that's essentially like not helping you in the long run. So I think that to me is what I take in. And if a problem arrives at my desk, then it's mine to absorb and take in and help direct, but it's not my responsibility to fix everything.
I really love that.
So that's kind of the balancing act that I try to strike in being a coach and helping you figure it out without taking that choice away from you and kind of fixing something on your behalf that you would have been proud to fix on your own.
Yeah, I think this is, really essential. A lot of the leaders that I work with struggle with this precise thing. I'm curious, was this something, that you had to work through your own challenges in order to get to sort of more of a coaching mindset? Did you used to be the jump in and sort of solve it for other people kind of leader? And if so, what did that transition look like for you?
Yeah, I've never been a micromanager, thankfully. Like I never had that feel that I could do everything better than everyone around me. And not that people have that sense, but I think the coaching mentality was always kind of part of my personality. Even in my early life, like I would like to play off of people and like have that even in social situations and like in work environments. I was always a contributor, and I wanted to deliver on my personal responsibilities and say what you do and do what you say. But also like I never felt the need or felt that it was very helpful to like take something away from someone. So I never practiced that in my day to day, but ultimately, like, I think people often don't love that either. They come to you with a problem, and the response is sometimes a question, and they just want an answer. And then you ask them a question, and then they answer it, and then you ask them another question, and like you're helping them be that sounding board, and you're helping them like logic out the potential solution. And sometimes like they're like, just give me the answer. I don't want to go through this exercise. It's something that I think in the long run breeds the type of collaboration with your partners and builds that trust, and doesn't take that responsibility away from them, like I said. So I feel in the people appreciate that, and like I said, they feel proud of the solution that they did something difficult. And as a coach, if you help someone do something harder than they thought they could have, they're gonna, like, you've just increased their capacity, you've just increased their own self-image in a way that's like such an empowering feeling, and such a great feeling for the leader to observe that in their team. So I feel it's harder. Yeah, like it's sometimes easier just to say like, here, give it to me, let me do it. But if you resist that urge, I feel in the long run you're both better for it.
Great. It really reminds me, one of my favorite leadership quotes is by a man named Peter Block, and it says, perhaps the greatest responsibility of any leader is to confront another with their own responsibility, agency, and freedom. And
Yeah,
people don't often like that, but that is ultimately what empowerment is. So, what I'm
awesome.
hearing is that, and of course, innately, all of us bring particular qualities that are more natural in leadership. I guess I'm curious, of course, it's also difficulties, the things that don't come as easy, or the things that we've really challenged or been struggled with that really, test and shape us. So I'm curious, what's maybe been something difficult and necessary that you've experienced to become the leader that you are today?
Yeah, and I think failure is such a good teacher. And so, just the definition of failure then becomes obsolete, in a sense that if I learn a lot from a situation, is it a failure? Probably not in the long run. And so these challenges are really where the growth happens. And, I could think of early in my career, in my second job, I took on a role at a leading consulting company, and it had this brand name, and I was now a consultant, which made me feel fancy, and all these things. And so in a lot of ways there were some warning signs about the role and my personal like skill set that weren't ideal. But in a way, whether it's my ego at the time or what I thought was the right thing to do, I took that role on without considering fit. And thinking back to my family, in a lot of ways, fit is not something you care about. Like, what do you mean fit? Like, the highest ranked college is the one you go to, the highest profile job, and the one that looks best on your resume is the one you take. What do you mean? So in a lot of ways, it was a hard lesson for me to learn that, that leadership always came naturally to me as in my youth. But when I went to this big consulting company, and I became very socially isolated, I really struggled with my contribution, and therefore struggled with my self image, and therefore would not take the responsibility on of being a leader in that environment. So, in a strange way, that was like the ultimate lesson for me, is that, who I am in a particular environment is greatly enhanced by me feeling like I have friends, I have peers, I have people that care about me, I care about people. And that really unlocks our leadership in a meaningful way that gets the most out of us and contributes the most to the people around us. So, it sounds soft, and it sounds, a little going back to like just the hard skills, and really relying on there, but really the fit, having those folks that you can get along with and care about, could be really valuable in unlocking your productivity and the quality of your contribution. So you can't be a leader if you're uncomfortable. And I feel that if folks prioritize their fit and finding the right environment for themselves, then they will become amplifying their leadership skills in a real way. And it really becomes being self aware enough to notice that discomfort versus comfort. And I think that was a lesson very early in my life. So what I did from there was I went back to business school at that time, kind of soul searching and also career searching, and realized that, you know, there was this community out there. There was a lot of folks, and I really found myself again in that way. And since then, I've always like looked for that fit to be there, whether that's with companies or with my clients now. When there's a fit and there's that collective connection is when the best work happens. And so that's become a real priority in for me and my leadership.
I really love that. Here's several things in there I'd love to sort of touch on. One is, first of all, what the vast majority of people call the soft stuff, I consider the essential stuff.
Yeah.
You know, like our experience of actually being connected to not only other human beings, but to ourselves, and what that means for actually showing up and being what I am, and not just doing the performance or the hard skills of leadership is actually, to me, what's right at the essence of true leadership. The other thing that I really hear there and I appreciate so much is that this very much aligns with my view on true leadership, that leadership is a journey of personal growth, and it is being in those situations that aren't a fit that help us determine
Yeah.
where those edges are in ourselves and help us discover more of who we are through that, right? So I just love that, and I really see that in your own path, allowing, you know, leadership and work and career and all of these things really helping you to discover more of yourself in that leader to that extent. And it seems apparent that, you know, that self-awareness that you've already talked about. Leadership, of course, is what we pour into ourselves, and, you know, the self-awareness and the growth. Thinking of your journey over the past few years, what's been the most valuable investment that you've made in yourself? Whether a coaching program, a community, another commitment, and what difference has it made?
Yeah, I think it kind of depends on who you are. And for me, I think in ideas, I think in the abstract. And oftentimes um I think in analogies. And a lot of these things are very valuable in my brain, but ultimately in a very core function of leadership is communication, and being able to take this abstract idea, crystallize it in a way that's digestible for your audience, and in a way deliver a message that is going to resonate and is going to be memorable. And so to that end, I think the very basic function of reading consistently has been a really valuable way of not just what you consume and the information you bring in, but also for me personally, it's how these ideas are communicated through word. And so, you know, the day that I start with reading, I feel like such a better communicator, and therefore, just by virtue of the nature of leadership, a better leader. And so it's not and you know, I have a 4-year-old and a 2-year-old. I have a new business that I'm hustling for. So yeah, like reading is not leisurely reading in the mornings is not something that there's a lot of time to do. But ultimately, like when I'm able to force myself into that habit is where I feel like I really unlock uh, that enables everything else around it, including leadership, which is a soundness of thought and a clarity of communication that is really a core function of connection and therefore leadership.
Yeah, well, as a father and entrepreneur myself, I second that. You know, not necessarily having all of the free time for reading. Uh, so I totally hear that. Uh,
Yeah.
you know, and someone certainly who prioritizes, you know, and values deeply communication and words, and also I believe like the immersion in other people's ideas and ways of thinking about things. So I love that. I'm curious. Leadership, of course, is we've talked a lot about who you are as a leader now, what's brought you to this point. What's your vision for your leadership, your legacy, or the impact that you want to have in your years ahead?
Yeah, I think that the transition that I made from the corporate world to a more entrepreneurial world is really where the growth is coming from, and where I'm needing to adapt aggressively and therefore feel like I'm changing the legacy that I could leave. In some ways, had figured out the corporate world. I was promoted 6 different times by 5 different leaders at the end of my career. And it was obviously like I had room to grow, but also I was able to work well with different leaders and really complement them and with my work in a way that was additive. And so, that led to growth for both of us, including myself, in a way that was very, empowering and felt great. But I always thought of myself as a more of an entrepreneur and someone that could create something. And in the corporate world, you do, but in a lot of instances, you're helping make someone else's vision come to life. And I wanted to, in some ways, bring my own vision to life. And that was the turning point for me, was the transition to my current function, which is starting my own consulting company, working with company and clients to further their objectives, creating a suite of products, being the connector, like I said, between function and things. So um, each day is unique and new challenge, and something that isn't as linear. Like in the corporate world, punch the clock and you deliver for a period of time, and then the thing kind of flows in a very linear way. Whereas in the entrepreneur, there's a lot of stop and go, and what sometimes feels like stagnation, or even slide back. And being able to stay within yourself, and continue to believe in your objective and move forward the next day, where just around the corner there's a big green shoot for you to enjoy. So that becomes kind of the next phase for me now, is being that driving force, and rather than pushing and helping along with people, being the one that's pushing from the front, and convincing people that we're going to get this barrel to the top of the hill, so help me along the way. So the change in mindset, and the communication, and just the thought process, has been really something that you read about, you watch, but then when you're in the middle of it and you're feeling it, is definitely different and unique experience that has its good parts, and but also its challenges. So it's been a
Well, I am right there with you in terms of the birthing of vision, and it really kind of brings me back to what we were chatting about right before the call, and you've talked about it here in this podcast, as well as what leadership means given different changing contexts. And I'm really hearing you say that, and that kind of leads me into my next question. Of course, there's always that growing edge. I truly believe that leadership is not like you've reached it and then you're there. It's a journey of personal and consistent and ongoing growth. It seems that you have definitely evolved into your next place of leadership. I guess what I'm curious about, you're already speaking to it a bit, but pulling out just a little bit more, what are the current challenges that you are experiencing that you're recognizing, maybe the patterns to let go or to expand to your next new perspective?
Yeah, I think in the corporate world, particularly when you're a little bit more senior in your career, you're almost anointed as the leader, and you're given a team, you've given a title, and you've given this like org chart that has arrows pointing in a certain direction. And so there's a lot of built-in infrastructure, if you will, that reinforces you as a leader. Even like performance reviews and the one-on-ones, and there's always this structure that puts you in a position of authority, and therefore operating as a leader in that kind of structure is different, versus where org charts don't exist, where deals are being made between peers and clients and partners. And so it's amalgamous in a way that it requires you to think uniquely in each situation and exert your leadership in to peers and to different audiences in a unique way that isn't you influencing someone that thinks of you as their boss. You know, these people are in some cases for me more senior than me. They've been in industry longer, or with clients, they lived and breathed this product for the last 10 years, and now I'm coming in trying to give them advice. It's almost like, what do you know about this? You know, so the trust building, that credibility and that leadership of thought is rooted in the same things that we've been talking about, which is building trust and building an accountability between parties. So with a certain client, I have to spearhead certain like thoughts and be able to be salesy enough for him to consider your idea as worthy to invest his time into, even though he has more skin in the game than I do in this dynamic. So I think that's the part where it's so fascinating that in certain instances, there's a partner that you influence and you encourage to take risks. In other cases, you're talking to a client and you're trying to create a partnership and build that trust with, which is a different type of dynamic in leadership. Sometimes it's leading from behind, sometimes it's is leading from the front and taking that risk on the collective's behalf. And so the the plurality of like being an entrepreneur and the different types of relationships that you end up needing to influence and act as a leader in becomes a lot more varied and requires a much more tact than in a corporate world where there's a lot of definition and hierarchy embedded. So I think it's been a very interesting learning experience, um and one that like is very much ongoing. I think by nature I'm a little less confrontational than the average person, and so in these instances, like in some cases, more direct communication is required. And that brings me out of my shell where I'm like, only have 15 minutes with this person this week. Like, I can't be like, oh, wouldn't it be great if, go this indirect route. Sometimes you have to have built the trust to be able to have that direct communication. And so that's like an area that I continue to feel uh, a challenge in those conversations. Like, not that by virtue of definition, confrontational or direct is going to have more friction. But
Yeah.
that's an area that I'm still trying to learn and not be afraid of, I guess, is another way to say it.
Yeah. I mean, first of all, I love that every single leader has their particular edges and these different stages of leadership that we're going to get to. I love the distinction that you're bringing between, what it is to be granted authority to some extent by virtue of having a role versus needing to find within yourself and assume and own the leadership that is needed in a moment, regardless of whether that's already there, and how much that changes and requires us to find, for example, different parts of ourselves that we may, that direct part of me that maybe doesn't want to be so confrontational, and yet that's what's needed here. So I just
Yeah.
love that. I think it speaks so articulately to what the journey of leadership looks like. So this last question is more of an invitation. Yeah, you have the time and the space here to offer to our listeners whatever it is that is most in your mind and your heart to share right now. Anything at all. Floor is yours.
Yeah, I appreciate it, Ty. Like I mentioned to you before our call, that this has been a good opportunity to reflect and take pause and take inventory of what I believe to be leadership. I do, like I said, think in analogies, and so I'm gonna share a couple that I think are very interesting to me. And so I think in a true sense of leadership, like taking inspiration from the world around you, no matter the format or no matter the area, is really an opportunity. And so, it could be something, one of the mentors that I had, he took inspiration from literally his dog. His dog's personality of how it approached people and how it, I think he emulated that. And so, that it's a unique example and it's a funny one. He obviously used it in jest in some cases, but I think the world around us has so much inspiration in it. And if we're paying attention and listening and watching, we can be inspired by things that aren't, corporate leadership related. So the two examples of that for me, one is sailing. And if you really zoom in on a boat, on a sailboat, it's constantly tacking back and forth, right? Like, so it's going left and right, left and right. And only when you completely zoom out does it look like it's going straight in a particular for a particular destination. And so, when you ask about like the particular skills and the particular environments and all that, I think that what has worked for me and what I see as constructive is really isolating those decisions at the time and making the best decision for you in that moment. And that's the tacking back and forth. Like, it may not be exactly towards the destination that you've put out for yourself, but that back and forth is what is ultimately going to lead to your progress and push you forward. And then when you eventually zoom out and look back, you're like, I was chugging along to this exact location all along. I did vary my path a bit, but that is ultimately the path of least resistance in the area that you could grow fastest in. So that's one. The second one is, I think oftentimes as leaders, we are in the position to problem solve. And that gives us somewhat of a unique opportunity to play off of someone else's issue or a problem that someone has thought about and presents to you in a particular way. And then if you think about it, there's always like the emotional dynamics that's happening within groups and communities and people themselves and all that. So sometimes, like, when someone comes to you and is anxious, you're reassuring. If someone comes to you and they're not confident, you puff out your chest and you try to react to them. And so that becomes sometimes a burden more than an opportunity. And so the thing that I take inspiration from is sage. And I'll get to what I mean. Sage exists in many cultures, Native American, Hindu, Taoism, all across the world. As a, if I always thought of sage as a neutralizer, there's some bad energy, some bad juju. Here comes sage, hits it, neutralizes, dissipates, and now it's gone. But only later did I realize that no, that's not how sage works. It's not neutralizing. It's actually filling the room with the positive energy. It's cleansing by pushing out the negative, by filling a space with the positive, with the cleansed air. And so if I go back to my analogy with the problem solving and playing off of people, sometimes it's not about that. Sometimes it's not about being reassuring. Sometimes it's not about being confident when someone is feeling insecure. It's actually being yourself and being that sage in the room that is so powerful and so encompassing that you fill the space in a such a unique way that people can feel, that can rally around, and that they could feel, and you rid them of their problems and their insecurities by filling them with something else. And so, I think that when I think of true leadership, I really think of it as not playing off of people, but being yourself to such a degree with such emphasis and such passion that it fills the room like sage, and people can feel cleansed around you. And so those are the two analogies, I think, the sailboat and the sage, that I'll part you with.
Well, I really, really enjoy those analogies and certainly could burn some sage with you anytime. I've got some right over here in the corner, and I'll be thinking about that as I do it. And yes, and that articulation of true leadership, I couldn't agree more. To me, there's nothing more powerful than simply being what we actually are. Um,
Yeah.
that is something that can't be done, right? So,
Yeah.
Armen,
It's one of
I
those, you can't do it enough. Like, it's one of those things that the more you're yourself, the better. There's no like I'm too much myself. It's one of the few things
exactly.
in the world that you can't overdo.
Yep, I love that. Well, Armen, I so have appreciated the wisdom that you've shared here today. Your articulation of leadership and growth, leadership through changes and changes in context and in careers. Definitely wishing you the best in this new part of your own leadership journey. I am so sure that whoever listens in to this is equally going to benefit from what you've shared here today. And thank you so much for being on the True Leadership Podcast.
Thank you, Ty. I appreciate it. And like I said, it was a great opportunity to reflect. And thank you for giving me that.
Fantastic.
That's it for this episode of the True Leadership Podcast. If you enjoyed this conversation, you can subscribe to YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you're listening to this to catch future episodes. This conversation was brought to you by One Mountain Leadership, where we help leaders grow the capacity, confidence, and presence of true leadership through the True Leadership approach. To learn more about the approach, our offerings, our community, and how we can help you realize your potential in both leadership and in life, visit us at onemountainleadership.com.